Hey, Oren, welcome to the Virtual CMO podcast. I'm so glad you could join us today.
Yeah, my pleasure, Eric. Thanks for having me.
This is great because you are now officially the second fellow virtual CMO that I've had as a guest on the show. And to start things off today, I would really love it if you could just give the audience a little bit of history on your background. I know that you're currently running Kurve over in the UK. And how did you get there?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, it's funny. We are there, an on-demand CMO, virtual CMO across the pond. So yeah, it's nice to see a parallel professional brother, so to speak. Yeah.
Exactly.
So how did I get into being a CMO? I guess I've worked for a lot of VC-backed businesses over the last 17 years, and then about 8 years ago, I started my own consultancy. And since then, it's kind of a hybrid consultancy agency. We do the strategy, and we also do some tactical delivery work. And yeah, now I work for some really fantastic brands like Canon and Lenovo, done some work for HomeServe and Investec Bank, so some large corporates, but also I work with a lot of scale-ups. So those are my two primary types of businesses, and they're very different, very funny, interesting mix to have two contrasting. The one is undertaking digital transformation, and the other is trying to disrupt the former. So it's quite funny. Yeah, so it's a lot of fun, very very intense and very engaging. And really, I just love working with really smart people. And apparently, there's a big concentration of them in tech companies. So I think that's how I've ended up working with, but I've worked with over about 35 businesses now, B2C, B2B, and lots of different industries, quite specialized in the SaaS space and fintech space primarily.
It's so interesting because there's a lot in there, right, in terms of specialization.
Yeah.
And the needs of a big business are very different from the needs of a young company, a startup. And one of the things that I hear over and over again when working with young companies, small startups, is that initially they're pouring all their resources into developing their product and service, trying to figure out whether there's a true market for it before they tend to spend a lot of money on marketing. What do you see as you're working with a lot of these younger, smaller companies?
Yeah, I had a case like this the other day where they raised a lot of money. And what was interesting is the core audience and the core market, they cracked it. They had amazing retention, and the clients were over the moon. But the problem is the total addressable market they had was quite small. And when they then raised a very sizable round, I think it was the A round, and then they realized that what took them to where they are now is very far from the growth they need to achieve as a VC-backed business. So to go from, several 100,000 a month MRR to, 100 mil revenue, so 10 mil a month, is quite a leap. And the number of customers you need to service obviously is a little larger. You need to go from like a dozen customers to several thousand customers. And they realized the total addressable market on which the basis they raised the money is too small, but they never did that analysis up to that point. So now they're pivoting the business after the A round, which is not what you want. Really, the A round is the fuel for accelerating the growth. And I think what happens in early stage business is, I think it's better to understand the addressable market, how big it is, rather than raise money under the premise you're going to hire lots of smart people and figure it out, because that doesn't work so well from what I've seen. It's very difficult to figure out product market fit while you have a large team that's growing with lots of different opinions. And then the business tends to go in lots of different directions and focus is diluted. And I think ambition, I'm really big on ambition. I like working with ambitious people. I'm very ambitious myself, but there's ambitious and there's realistic. And I think it's important that ambition doesn't exceed realistic constraints, because I think the emotional anxiety and stress on the founder is tremendous. But I also think it erodes the worth and confidence of the team. And then you start losing good people. They've learned a lot about your business. They leave. The cost of that is horrific to the business to take a hit on that. So that's I've seen a few of those now. I've also seen the flip side. I've seen businesses where, early stage of my career, I was employee number 15, and it grew to 1,000 employees in 2.5 years. And that was one of them, like a unicorn business in the UK. Not many of them have that, and I was very fortunate to ride that wave and see it. So I'm not saying it's all gloom, but if you think about how many unicorns exist in the world, I think it's somewhere between 84 and 130. Now, if you think, because there's like 100, let's say 150 unicorns, how many businesses are there? Well, tens of millions. Wait a second, that's not a good odd. So the odd of becoming a scaling, crazy Pinterest, Twitter, Facebook, etc., odds are against you. I think, therefore, there needs to be a tempering of realistic expectations. I'm very big on building sustainable businesses and profitable businesses. I'm not necessarily a big believer in like trying to become a unicorn business. I'm not fond of this as a concept. I think it's really about market opportunity and the competitive forces. And I think if you have an amazing opportunity, you have a best-in-class product, then go for it, do that. But it has to be realistic, and that's based on data and research, not ambition. And I think that's the key point I'm trying to address here, is having vision is immaterial without the data to back it up. And I see a lot of founders, they don't really do the proper research, but they're very ambitious. So I would recommend against doing that. I think there's a reason there's market research. There's a reason this is a specialism and a competency. There's a reason big businesses invest so much money into that area.
I love that you brought up product market fit, because I think this is so key, especially for a lot of younger companies, because my experience working with founders is that they always think that they have something that is completely new in the marketplace. But you just said what I believe so strongly, in that what's usually true is that it's not completely different in the marketplace. It's a variation of something that already exists. And what you have to do is you have to build a best-in-class product. You have to do something that truly differentiates your particular take on a product or service, because there just aren't that many truly game-changing ideas or products out there. Would you sort of agree with that?
Yeah, I think there's two aspects to this. Previously, I think you could build a successful business just doing an amazing job with sales and marketing and having an average product. I don't think that's applicable in the world we live in anymore. And the reason is the disintermediation of players. So I think now people are going direct to consumer, and businesses are going direct, and no longer as reliant on the agency in terms of scales of economy. So I think the way people buy and the disintermediation is significant, and that's the first thing. I think also relying on salespeople to understand the proposition has changed. Now content marketing is really critical in the buyer's journey, especially in B2B, and that's becoming progressively more important over time, as we see. That's the first consideration. The second is I just think the way companies are actually structured, I don't think they have authentic innovation from what I can see. And I think the kind of key second consideration is reviews. So nowadays you go into TripAdvisor, you see reviews, you go to Google, you see reviews, and that innovation that you're expecting to see in the product, if that's not real, it's going to be reflected in those reviews. So people are going to, like the owner or the founders I speak to, they're kind of like, no, if you just do a great job in sales and marketing. And it's like, well, if people experience the product, they're going to leave a review reflecting their experience of the product. And like sales and marketing can't manipulate or change that. It's really hard to game these systems. And it's like growth hacking or like really creative solutions. It's just nonsense. Like you can't build a sustainable business that's based on recurring revenue if you don't have happy customers. Happy customers are so reliant nowadays on what they read other customers experiencing, testimonials or reviews, that you can't really fake that. And then I reckon in terms of businesses I come across, I'd say 1 in 20 to 1 to 25 is authentically innovating. Today I talked to one who's authentically innovating. They have unique IP and technology. Took the scientists 12 years to develop. And I was blown away because it's sustainable, it's very on trend, and it's like authentic innovation. And I was just like, wow, yeah, I'd love to work with you, because I think that you not only is it value aligned, you're doing something good that benefits people, but also you're going to be commercially very successful because you're solving a real problem in the market. We just need to find that right fit. So yeah, I think it's just rare. I think it's just really hard. I think like if you're entrepreneurial, you're not the scientist who's going to do a PhD in mechanical bioengineering. And I think the truth is, if you think of how many multimillionaires and multi-billionaires even there are in the world, they're actually technical engineers by background. Software developers, you think about Stripe, or you think even about Musk, or you think about other businesses, it's actually engineers, or Mark Zuckerberg, their background is building products, and they built it from scratch themselves, and they're very successful as a result. And I think we're moving away from a sales and marketing-led world to a product-led world. And I think product-led marketing, product marketing, particularly important functions are growing rapidly. And I think that's where a lot of the growth is going to come from. A lot of VCs recommend that for technology-based businesses now as the first hire for that to be a product marketeer. And I'm specifically talking about SaaS here. And obviously they're very different in B2C.
I think it's interesting that you're working with both SaaS companies and you mentioned fintech as well, because when I look at the landscape, you have a lot of legacy software companies, right, that are still struggling in the move to the cloud because of their huge investment in older technology. Younger companies often have an advantage there because they can build for today's technology right now. And the same is true in the financial services space, right? You have a lot of big players there who have invested, billions of dollars over the years in their infrastructure. But now all these fintech innovators come up and they can create these truly innovative solutions very quickly. And they're out innovating the big players who have a lot more resource than they do. What do you see as some of the unique kind of marketing challenges for some of these legacy players, these bigger businesses?
Yes, I've worked in some of them, having worked in a few banks, and I've also worked with a lot of the fintech. So I can really delineate. I think, one of the banks I worked in, they had 5 layers of risk. So I remember getting a PDF approved took me 3 months. And it was like a marketing piece of collateral. And the barriers because of risk and compliancy and processes and systems limit them. The truth is they are more secure and more robust than these new contenders that are coming to play. And it's very evident when you see like a Wirecard go bust, or I remember a lot of the fintechs in the UK a few months ago, they couldn't make payments because one of the core foundational players is they're all relying on this one player in the supply chain, and they went bust, and the banks were working fine. I'm not saying the banks don't have problems as well because of the legacy issues, and they do, but I'm just saying that it's not really a like-for-like comparison. And that's important to understand. So also the pros and cons, the pros of the banks and the fact they have so secure, and the legacy issues is also their con, and the fact that they're very slow and they can't adapt as quickly. So I think it's a really interesting complexity. I think there's 2 components. One of them is the technology stack and the archaic nature of it and how it's been built up on the stack of dominoes over the years. But the second is a cultural component, and the cultural component is a real issue. So the businesses and corporates I work in, so the people have worked there 10, 15, 20 years. What happens is they get very conditioned in the way that they think, and they adapt to the company culture. And corporates are generally risk averse and relatively slow. And I think the cultural transformation that I see is really challenging. And people are struggling to adapt. So there's a few things. There's a skills shortage. There's a lack of digital skills, especially for people who've been doing something offline for a very long time. It's a steep learning curve. And then the cultural component and attitude is another thing. It's like, why do I need to change the way I do things? Why do I need to learn these new tools? And then the third is actually just a shortage of really great tools. There's like the fragmentation in the marketing tech landscape, and across all the other tools, design tools, product tools, and product management tools. And there's a lot of fragmentation. There is no one tool that does everything really deep that everyone's happy with. Everyone is using 20, 30, 50, 100 tools in their business. And a lot of the time, these tools don't integrate well. So now you have this meta layer of tools that could connect other tools. And then you have meta tools that those tools buy that connect the piping for those tools. And it's like, it's really hard. The supply chain for the tech stack is very intricate. And just learning and understanding that while you're trying to do your normal day job, which is already doing 10, 15 things, people are overwhelmed. And then you're getting 150 emails a day. So you're overwhelmed because of the frequency of communication and the need for everyone to disseminate information to work more agile. And then everyone actually works less agile because no one can absorb and be aware of what 5,000 other people are doing. So I think the startups benefit not just from the speed because of the lack of archaic systems. They're smaller teams, and smaller teams can communicate more effectively. They don't have to include so many other people in the periphery. So they have a few different competitive advantages. I'd say it's the only competitive advantage. Speed is the only advantage a startup has. Doesn't have the resource, doesn't have the brand, doesn't have the reputation, doesn't have the relationship, doesn't have the infrastructure. So what do they really have? They just have speed, and they need to capitalize on that in order to win.
One thing I'm consistently fascinated with is in the financial services space, especially, that would be a case where I would say that a lot of the big banks, financial service institutions out there truly view that they have a unique and a differentiated product. And I think most of us would argue that they absolutely do not. Maybe that there are some corporate products or investment products. We certainly saw with the financial crisis years ago that some of those were innovative products that ended up causing a lot of problems. But I think by and large, people would look at something like a financial services institution and say, you don't really offer anything unique. You offer savings and checking and certificates of deposit and these kinds of things. Where they're really differentiated is on their service levels. and how people perceive their interactions with those organizations. Do you see that often in companies that you work with as well? Is it's not so much the product or the service, or the product, I mean, that's the differentiator. It's really the service levels that they've established?
So I'm going to delineate here the product they sell, the deployment of that product, and then the service. So if we just start at the product, like if you think about a financial institution selling loans, all banks who give loans are all selling the same product, which is cash, which is money, which is actually very commoditized, right? The value of money is very low. So they're all selling the same commoditized product. So how are they differentiated? And the answer is they're not. But the way that you access that product, how fast is it? How efficient was it? And how was that experience? Was that a mobile first experience, or do you have to go through a 20-page form online on your responsive website? And that experience of how you access it, even though it's commoditized, is the differentiating point. And then the next layer is the services layer. It's like, if I have a problem with the product or I have an issue, how fast are they? How responsive are they? How helpful are they? How easy is it for me to access? Like if I'm getting rerouted through 6 different countries in Southeast Asia, between Vietnam and India, to talk to different representation and different geographies, different time zones to try and resolve my issue, and I spent 9 hours on the phone, I'm exhausted, exasperated, and I'm going to go switch to another bank, right? So I think for that, definitely, I think there's also a big winning point for the US. The US are very customer centric in a way that European countries would like to think that they are, but aren't really. Like the US has a higher standard of expectation as a customer, and businesses adapt to meet that. In Europe, it's a bit more relaxed. Like we're stronger in other areas, but customer service is not the best in terms of. And I think what's really interesting is businesses look at customer services as a cost, and by outsourcing it to a cheaper country, it affects the P&L. But what they're really doing is they're compromising the longevity of the brand perception of the loyal customers, because they're outsourced it to someone who's not necessarily as good as someone who would be local. And then that's something I've seen definitely in fintech in the UK with different service providers and how they provide that level of service. And I think a lot of it actually comes down to the tools that the customer service operators actually use as well. So it goes back to the technology stack and how integrated that data is, how easy it is to access. Because if the rep is like typing on a record for a customer, and that takes like 2 minutes for that page to load, that affects the experience for the customer, but it also experiences, and then the rep gets frustrated. And then like how many, aggravated or agitated customers can you deal with in a day before the motivation is like you? So I mean, customer service it's really one of the most important functions in the business, but it's also one of the most undervalued in the sense that it's just really difficult. It's very like, what do you do if there's a problem in the products and you have an influx of calls because of a technical issue, and it can put a lot of strain on the business. I don't think there's an easy way to solve this. I think it's like every other part of the business: excellent people, excellent processes, excellent systems, excellent planning, and just like not trying to do too many things at the same time. Radical focus, specialization, product positioning. I mean, really building a business like a car, right? And cars have 60,000 components, and if you miss the fuel tank, is the car still going to get from A to B? Just one item of the 30,000 components. If you got 29,999, is it still going to be able to drive? And the answer is no. And a business kind of operates the same, except you can kind of drive a wonky car with like, the wheels aren't really inflated and the gears are kind of sticky, and, and you gotta decide what is the most important feature for your customers when they're buying this car. Like, and how are you different than all the other cars the customer's trying to buy? And the truth is, you can't have the best wheels and the best bonnet and the best windscreen and the best, like, everything. You can, but then you're Porsche. And then the truth is, if you look at your market share between Volvo and Porsche, you see the difference. And the reason is there's very few people who can buy a product that's good. So instead of trying to be the best at everything, just be best at the thing that's most important across your competitor set for your customer type. And that niche thinking, as the business grows, they start to diversify because they want to mitigate risk. But what they're actually doing is strategic compromise, and then the cards fall and the business collapses, and we see that a lot. And I think the reason a lot of these big businesses collapse is because they're just not really focused. And if you look at what Steve Jobs had done with Apple, and I think there's a few other businesses that did this, like Starbucks, is when the CEOs came in and the business was in disarray, it was because they had too many SKUs and too many product lines. Then they cut all the crap and they just focused on what's most essential and important, and they just became the best at that, or those specific line of products, rather than having too many products. And I really think it's a difference between your mindset. Are you thinking we're the biggest, or are you thinking we're the best? And I think nowadays, if you care about like revenue, great, be the biggest. If you care about profit and bottom line, think about being the best. And I don't know about you. I run a business for profitability, not for vanity, you know.
That's
So
right.
that's my kind of business logic.
I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think you naturally segued into a great conversation about automation and technology, because it's not so much that technology is good or bad. Oftentimes it's the implementation of this technology, how it's being used, how people are trained to use it, what the effects of are on the customer experience. I talk a lot on this podcast about reducing friction in the buyer's journey to really enable people to discover your products, to be able to buy them easily, and then be able to service them, after the sale, because there is marketing involved in that entire journey. But as we look at the landscape, there have been so many incredible products that have come to market that have really made things easier. We are talking on a live stream today, and we're broadcasting to multiple platforms at the same time, as well as recording a podcast. And this is all software that's relatively new. In fact, the founders of this particular company, it looks like they just graduated from high school. They're young guys, and I give them a lot of credit for creating something like this already. But when you look at the marketing automation landscape and all the tools that are out there, what do you see changing? It's so crowded.
Yeah. So what I see is, so actually did this really interesting project recently. It's a collaboration with SimilarWeb, and we took all of the different MarTech players based on Scott Brinker's incredible work with the Lumascape and the infographic, shows all the 8,000 logos. And we looked at all the traffic to all of these different websites over the last 3 years to try and understand what are the trends and what is changing, what is happening. So it's a really interesting question. So I'm not going to reveal too much of the insight here, but hopefully you can share a link for people to register for the full report when we finish it in the notes.
Absolutely.
But, some of the learnings that we saw was the fragmentation is growing, but the total traffic isn't. So if the total traffic is stagnant, but there's a lot more competition, what does that mean for your business? It means it's getting more crowded. And that means you kind of need to be a bit more pinpointed and focused on the value that you deliver and do a better job, because you don't know when someone's going to come behind you and try and start eating up your market share in your niche. So I think it's getting more complicated for the buyer to discern what is the difference. So if we thought about this new category, one of the fastest growing categories in MarTech, by far the top 5 fastest growing, is CDPs, customer data platforms. So first I'll just explain what a CDP is for those who don't know. It allows you to personalize your customer's journey and collate all the information about them from all the different touch points into one centralized place. What that means is you can tailor better messages to them and understand their patterns of behavior, so you can increase personalization. And we're moving to a world of increased personalization, even though there is conflicting evidence on this. Gartner did release a report recently that said they think CMOs will abandon personalization. But if you talk to all the personalization tools, they have the exact opposite narrative, where they're saying there's a 5x to 10x growth in personalization. So I think they're both true. Some personalization initiatives will die, and some of them will live and thrive. And the answer as to which ones deliver value to the customer. So some personalization is done but unnecessary. So I think there's a really interesting question about this increasing fragmentation and competition. So with CDPs, they've grown massively. And if you look at them, there is no such thing as a CDP really. So different CDPs have such varied functionality that it's like a catch-all umbrella that's very broad and not explicitly meaningful. So a CDP is different than a CRM, because CRM captures customer records and notes for sales and customer services. A CDP doesn't do that. CDP gets customer data, allows you to centralize it for omni-channel personalization, and they're different. But if you look in the CDP market and try to understand the differences between them, it's a bit of a rabbit hole. And I think that's what the problem here is. The customer is overwhelmed, and the customer doesn't understand which is the best tool. And it's very hard. So I think what's happening now is, as there's more, the decision-making committees are growing in B2B, there's more people involved in the decision-making process, and there's more fragmentation, there's more due diligence required to find the right stack. And that's very difficult, because it's not to say that people are staying in their jobs for a longer period of time either. So if the researcher, they're very skilled at that tool, what actually happens when they start moving to another job? So I think the businesses are facing complexity on buying, and both the sellers are facing complexity with selling. And the fragmentation and marketing tech stack is very challenging for these businesses.
I can believe it. And, I thought we talked a little bit about your report, and I'm glad you're going to share that with the audience once it's fully available, because I think it's a very interesting study. But if you were consulting with a business, Would you say that the very first thing that they need to do is implement a CRM? Do you think that I guess what I'm asking is, where do you think is that pillar that they should start to build their marketing automation stack from?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. I think the foundational pillar, and I guess the way I see it from a marketing point of view, is that you need to get your positioning in the market right. You then need to get your branding right. You then need to get your messaging right. Then once you know, your audience, the messages, you're very clear on who you're going, you know where you're getting them from, like which channels. So you have your channel, you have your audience, you know your resource and your team deployment. Then you need to start defining your tech stack. So it's actually almost 4 or 5 layers down in just your marketing strategy. And what I actually see businesses doing is they put that number 1. They go, let's get HubSpot and then figure it out. And I'm like, what do you think HubSpot does? And then it's like an ambiguous, it helps us with our marketing. Great. And what do you think it actually does? And they don't really understand. HubSpot's really good at like capturing, leads and nurturing them, and effectively give you insight on who to prioritize for your sales team. That's really fundamentally what it does really well. It also does other things, like it does a bit of SEO, it does a bit of content marketing, it has like a basic CMS, it has a few other bits to it, but fundamentally the root of the benefit is this basic automation, and that's really built for scaling. Now, if you don't have product market fit, why do you need a tool that's going to enable scale? So what I see is that businesses are trying to buy the tech first, rather than really thinking about the solution they're solving well. So I think the problem is there's variability on the type of marketing software they need, because I've seen businesses buy very expensive kit, believing they're going to grow into it, and then they couldn't get the internal team to buy in. So they ended up spending hundreds of thousands on the kit that the team just was reluctant to use, and then they ended up using kit that was like 1/10 of the cost. Now that kit was really right for when they scale, but they're so far away from that point that the timeline for growing into it is completely disconnected from where they are. And I think that problem, it's very variable. So I don't think there's a clear key pillar, because also marketing automation is a very broad category. You can have really lightweight tools like ConvertKit or ConvertFlow, which helps to capture leads and nurture and have basic email pop-ups. Technically, that's marketing automation, but that's not like Marketo or Pardot, which is like Salesforce or even Adobe, which is also marketing automation, but this costs you 50x. And I think the problem is the businesses are not clear on what right tool, because some of the businesses do a really great job with marketing and sales, but they're not selling the right tool to the business at the right stage that they need it at. And that's a problem that I commonly see as well. I think it's specialists. I think they need an expert to help them navigate and figure out what is the right tech stack. But the problem is they need to have that as an extension of their marketing strategy. I also think companies spend too much on the technology, and I'm a technologist, I love it, yeah. But I don't think a business should be spending more than 15% of their marketing budget on technology. The budget should be spent on distribution, and it should be spent on cutting through the noise with great creative and great content. And it shouldn't really be about automation and efficiency and reducing overhead, because that's, even though it is a big cost, that's not where growth is going to come from. Growth is not going to come from removing unnecessary strain on your small team. It's actually going to come from getting more customers and doubling your revenue. And that, I think the focus is in the wrong place when people think about technology. They think technology is going to solve a lot of the problems that it doesn't really solve. So I think the core pillar, making sure you choose the right tech stack for the problem that you've got, the business stage that you're in.
I think what you said is so important, because marketing tools, marketing tactics are not the same thing as a marketing strategy. And you really have to have that overall strategy, understand what you're trying to accomplish, what your goals are, in order to know what tools do I need, what tactics do I need to implement. And I would agree, I've seen so many companies invest large dollars in tools, but you have to have the resources to run the tools. You have to put information into the tools. You can't buy a Facebook ad without creating the ad. You can't, use an inbound marketing strategy without creating marketing content. There's a lot that goes into it, a lot of pieces. And so often it seems that people jump to the tool without realizing what you have to feed the beast in order for it to actually provide any value to you.
Well, because the tools are easy to understand. They're tangible. You can log into it. You can see if people are using it. You can understand the benefit, but the problem is, like, our audience targeting or audience creative assessing, it's intangible, and people have a hard time buying intangible. We want to see something concrete when we're spending money. And a lot of this is actually because we're consumers, we want to buy something that's tangible. But ironically, we buy, if you think about some of one of the most valuable assets in the world, I'd argue is probably one of the least valued, and that is a book. A book, you can learn so much from a book. But what is the cost of the book? A fiver, a tenner? It's kind of interesting. It's packed with insight, and it can change your life. It can transform your business. It can transform your personal life, but it's valued very low. And I think it's actually this anchoring of a misunderstanding of the value of strategy versus execution. That's where the confusion is. And what I see businesses doing is they're executing a lot. They're just executing on the wrong things at the wrong time, in the wrong direction, usually with the wrong people, using the wrong tools. And then they come to me and they say, I don't understand why we're not managing to get a result. And then I'm like, well, you got the wrong people, the wrong tools, the wrong thing. And we've got to fix all of this. And the reason is, I think it's a specialist. I think people just don't understand how specialist it is. There's 16 different types of marketeers. There's 7,198 pieces of marketing tech. There's different tiers with different needs for different types of businesses. There's sometimes specialist tools for different businesses. And I had one business, I remember they said, for three, intercom is crap. And I'm like, really? No, intercom's a pretty good tool. It does what it says on the tin, and it's got robust functionality. Yeah, but it can't do this and this. And like, you're trying to get it to do something it doesn't do. It's like, you're like, a hammer is really a bad tool because it doesn't do what a screwdriver does. I'm not sure what to say to that. It's like, you're using the wrong tool if you're expecting a hammer to do what a screwdriver does. And I see that very common is they haven't done enough due diligence in-house to realize what the tool does or doesn't do. And because they underestimated how complex and specialist it is. And marketing automation is very specialist.
Well, and we talked about this as well before the call, but with all of these tools out there and the marketplace just getting saturated, there probably isn't going to be longevity for all of them, right? Because there are a lot of things that do a piece of what you want, but not everything that you want. And there's room for consolidation for some of these tools to come together and say, well, you do this piece and we do this piece, but you need both pieces. So let's combine this into one tool. I can really see just in my own marketing stack and the kinds of tools that I invest in, I wish that certain things would come together as opposed to being in separate tools. And with all of these players in the marketplace, there can't be room for all of them long-term. Don't you envision a lot of consolidation?
I actually have a number, and the number is roughly 43%. So 43% of the ones that are going to die off. Wow. And a lot of them, it's really hard out there. I think people underestimate the complexity and difficulty. And you kind of go, okay, Oren, but where do you get that number from? And the answer is, if a website's traffic is in consistent decline for the last 3 years, the probability of them recovering is only 2%. So we've got data to validate the number of recoverant, ones who manage to they go up and then they go down, and then how many manage to go back up again. And over 3 years, only 2% of the ones who have a consistent decline manage to recover. I call it the Kevin Spacey effect. Effectively, you have such a big boom to your career, your probability of coming back from that is marginal. So I think the probability of recovery is very low. But so many of the websites in MarTech have a decline in traffic. And it's definitely a skew. The ones who are big, they have much better growth and patterns, and the ones who are small, they're very volatile. So some of them are in hyper growth, and then a lot of them are actually stagnant, and a lot of them are declining. And I think it's where are you, and where have you solidified your position in the MarTech landscape? Like, I think HubSpot is in a very good space. I think Marketo is in a very good space. I think Adobe, the ones who started 15 years ago, Salesforce, they're in a good space. But if you're brand new, it's like Russian roulette. You just don't know what the chances are of you managing to make it or not. It's just very, very high risk. And I think that's, any savvy VC investor or startup founder knows the odds are stacked against them, but they're still up for the challenge, which is really not only admirable. I think it's fantastic, but also on a practical level, VCs is one of the most effective investment vehicles in terms of returns. And the reason for that is that it works. They only get one or two of the customers that they've invested in the businesses to actually, become a unicorn, but they compensate for the losses of all the other businesses. And it is such an effective investment vehicle, and I think it's a very practical one because it obviously yields results. So I guess that's my view on this kind of, yes, there will be consolidation. I think we started doing some additional work to figure out what consolidation looks like, and I was surprised by how small it actually was. Like the number of businesses, just from initial data, it didn't look as much as consolidated as I expected. I think it's a very fragmented space, meeting lots of little niche needs. And I think just like the GDP in the US, where you have some gigantic businesses but like more than 60% of the GDP is like, businesses of less than 5 or 10 people or something, mom and pop shops. And the same is probably reflected in MarTech, where it's a lot of small businesses catering to very specific niches or specific audiences, and it isn't as big. We just have a skew because of how we're consuming news and our visibility and access to the landscape. And if you think about MarTech, you're going to think about YouTube ads or LinkedIn ads, or you're going to think about Quora ads, B2B, or you're going to be thinking about Unbounce or HubSpot or Marketo or marketing automation, or landing page tools and email marketing tools like Autopilot, etc. And I think there's just a lot of them, so it's hard for the brain to come to formulate the image, which I think why Scott's work is so fantastic. And then the work that I was doing was really trying to understand who's winning and who's losing, and then enable people better tools to select the vendor, but also help vendors understand how they are in the competitive set that they're in. And I was very curious, both from a vendor perspective and from a buyer's perspective, how to enhance the amount of data they have to make better decisions.
Not to toot our own horn here, but I think it's appropriate at this point. One of the reasons that you and I know I offer services like virtual CMO, on-demand CMO services is because marketing is truly complicated. There's a lot going on here. And the idea is for businesses who need help putting together a strategy to know where to make those investments in technology, to know what kind of campaigns and tactics are going to be effective for their business, to help them find that product market fit in their available market space. These are the kinds of things where we can help out. And it's so nice to have a conversation with you about this stuff, because I think it's so important for so many businesses to consider how services like this could be a benefit for them.
Yep, I'd agree. I'm just going to avoid tooting my own horn because you did it for me.
That makes it easier. Hey, I want to thank you, Oren, for being on the podcast today. I will make sure that we have all of your contact information in the show notes, so that if people want to take a look at that report when it comes out, they can do that and also find you online. But I do appreciate you being here today. This was a great conversation, and I look forward to seeing the full report myself.
Great. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, Oren.
Cheers.